Callaghan, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Cosmetic Business for inviting me back to speak to you today. I run the consultancy here in Hamburg, addressing mainly the challenges of the cosmetic claims legislation, and I work with a number of raw material suppliers as well as brands, helping them become compliant. I am not, however, a responsible person. In addition to this, my background is varied. I've spent over 30 years in the cosmetic industry working in both basic skin research, technical marketing, the ingredient supply base, as well as brands, and more recently in clinical research. And Callaghan Consulting International was set up in 2008 in order to address the issues surrounding cosmetic claims and trying to bring in more discipline into them. And so, as you can imagine, when the cosmetic claims legislation came in 2009 and then 2013, business started going up exponentially. So I'm happy to be here today to discuss with you the rather disturbing situation that even the world finds itself in, is challenging the fantasy when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, especially here today regarding cosmetic claims. For those of you who do follow me, one thing that I really got disappointed with and made a big deal about is obviously the effect of social media on the minds of the consumer. And as I said in one of my blogs, was that it has become a virulent source of untraceable whisker campaigns by whoever in order to sow confusion in the minds of the consumer and discredit the industry. And it is rather sad that we, the industry, are actually helping to perpetuate this problem. Now, the European Union put together the new regulation, and as regards to the claims legislation, that came into force in 2013. And many people just seem to think, oh, that's it, it's over and done with, fine. Cosmetic brands are settling in to follow through on their claims development. But has it? Is this just a misnomer? Is it just something glossy that we just seem to think that it's okay? Because certainly in my line of work, it isn't. And what we are finding is that, those who speak loudly are those that are going to win. And it's getting to the point where we are starting to wonder, or certainly I'm starting to wonder, is whether Rousseau, and that's why I used his quote, actually has a point. Is it becoming to the stage where those of us who are wise are finding ourselves in a field of madness, where we have people shouting loudly whether their facts are not factual, and it is becoming total folly. So if we bring this all together, clearly we are seeing that a cosmetic claim is basically the product itself. It's how you present it. It's how it's perceived by the consumer. And so this is everything from the text that you use, the names that you use, your brands, your trademarks, how you present it in terms of visuality, the pictures and the figures and other signs. And so this is what the cosmetic claim is. And of course, the legislation applies to any claim, irrespective of the medium or type of marketing that you are going to use in order to get your target audience. And of course, claims will always be a combination of different types. But many people, or certainly what I am finding is, whilst individuals or brands are focusing on the criteria, the 6 criteria that pull together this legislation, they are forgetting 2 other guidelines that cannot be separated from this. And one is the business to business directive on the misleading and comparative advertising directive, and the other one is the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And these have to be taken into consideration because in the labelling, making available on the market and advertising of cosmetic products, what you use, the tools that you use to basically make these claims shall not be used to imply that these products have characteristics or functions which they don't have. And it does seem rather strange that people don't understand what this word imply actually means. You know, it means suggest something. And I will give you an example from recently where my younger brother, bless him, actually said, Theresa, why is it that cosmetic claims, or certainly in the advertising, if they're advertising, for example, colour cosmetics, why did they make the models look like trussed up pornographic Christmas turkeys? Now, that was a bit unfair of him, but he made the point, you know, and one thing that I did want to point out here within that is bringing you to the Misleading Commercial Practices Directive in that is Article 6. And I'm not going to read it out. I've actually highlighted it there. And an example that we can give here would be in antiperspirants. When the claims started to develop about the longevity of antiperspirants, we started to see claims in the beginning of 96 hours antiperspirants. And so even though you can actually prove that an antiperspirant could last for 96 hours, in other words, it's factually correct in relation to this, it's actually misleading because nobody would use a 96-hour antiperspirant within the context of cosmetic usage. So the question that I am asking everyone here is why is it that so many people in the industry, including dermatologists, and here I'm focusing on the so-called celebrity dermatologists, and therefore the consumers just don't get it when it comes to marketing claims, because after all, cosmetic products are cosmetics. They are not miracles. And whilst they do work beyond perhaps something superficial, that they are not there to basically cure or suddenly make an 80-year-old woman or man look 20 years old and expect that effect to last. And in a recent interview that I did last year, I was having quite a, should we say, a intense discussion with the journalist in question. And we were speaking about that when a consumer sees a product in store or on the internet these days in the television, they are actually having a relationship with that product once they start becoming into it. And the other thing is of course, is the people or the consumers seeing this are not necessarily what we, the industry, describe as average consumers. And a concern that we have is that the regulation that we have focuses on the average consumer and therefore puts up a wall around, perhaps subconsciously or not realizing that they've done it. And so that the so-called non-average consumer is left out, and yet it's these non-average consumers that seem to be making the most noise. And an average consumer, if you want to know as defined by the regulation, is someone who's circumspect about what they are reading, what they are becoming, having a relationship with as regards to the product. And the thing is that as we have seen today, not just with cosmetics, but with, shall we say, the COVID vaccine, American politics, you know, there is all this, shall we say, disparity between what is true and what is not true. and it's becoming a mess, to say the least. And so what we need to understand is that when a consumer is having an interaction with a product, then everything regarding that interaction can be considered a claim. And this is actually what our legislation is trying to say. Some of you may have also read an article that I wrote for Cosmetics Business about a year ago now, but I use this a lot, and I've also put it in my book on cosmetic claims. It is that old adage, I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realise that what you heard is not what I actually meant. And this really does apply to cosmetic communication here. So where you have, for example, science and R&D working on some very innovative discoveries as regards to the skin, how, in the words of my brother, can that suddenly turn into, shall we say, a pornographic Christmas turkey? You know, it is quite, shall we say, disheartening to actually, shall we say, conclude that that's all it is. And so we need to be very careful that we're not creating, if I can use the old term, these whispers when passing on the message, like we used to do at school. And so if I can bring that forward to today, is if we look at some of these claims, such as clean, non-toxic, chemical-free, free from sustainability. These are all the claims that seem to be, shall we say, championing a lot of fantasy and noise. And so the question that I am asking the industry is, has the consumer become so terrifying that we have to make these claims? Or did we make the consumer terrifying because we, in our ignorance and stupidity, created the opportunity for these types of claims to be developed? Have we shot ourselves in the foot? Well, clearly that is a little bit true, because we haven't stopped them in any way. And even though those of us who, shall we say, do operate on social media, we can't spend our days on social media trying to educate against these. It needs to come from the industry as a whole. And so these are just some examples, though admittedly these are not very new. And if I just talk about the press, we need the press. The press have value, but it's decades and decades, we find ourselves at loggerheads with them, to the point that sometimes we have this love-hate relationship with them. So, for example, is, the promotion back in the 1920s of being able to have a soap that actually washes away fat. I mean, if anybody actually created such a product, they really would be the richest person on the planet, I think. But then, terminology like, is this the secret weapon in the anti-aging war? There's no such thing as secret weapons in anti-aging war when it comes to cosmetics, because at the end of the day, we age. The day we are born is the day we are destined to die, whether it's sadly within a few weeks, or whether we live to be 100. As each minute of the day goes by, we age, and it doesn't matter what we do to try to halt how this looks and how we are. We age, and we have to deal with that. And then, of course, the other thing about, shall we say, non-toxic here and natural and organic, we are really tripping up on this, because life is toxic. The way we speak to each other, the food that we eat, the environment that we live in. And so trying to make these non-toxic claims when it comes to cosmetics really is a fantasy, to say the least. And then, of course, the whole, shall we say, noise around chemical free. And I would actually like to thank James Kennedy here. He's probably not listening in, but he's actually a school teacher in Australia, and he put this up on the internet. And as part of his teaching program to the children in school, was about the chemicals, the natural chemicals contained in what we perceive as natural products. And of course, eggs, bananas, and blueberries, you'll probably find them in cosmetic products, certainly in the natural ones. And it just goes to show that life, the stuff of life is chemicals. And so you cannot have a chemical-free product. And then, of course, then is the alternative facts, the disinformation, the misinformation, and shall we say, the hyping up of this. And for those of you, because I was part of this, was this spat recently on LinkedIn with Cosmetic, who keep regurgitating all the misinformation about parabens. And I still think that argument is actually going on LinkedIn. And then another one, particularly for those in America who follow EWG, they are not always telling the truth either. And so all of this, that there needs to be some coherency in the messaging here. And I would like to thank Sam Farmer for allowing me to use a quote that he used not so long ago, was it doesn't matter if your claims are clean, zero waste or non-toxic. If the packaging at the end of the day ends up in the bin, then of course it's all for nothing. And so it's all about using your common sense. And of course, this is always the hardest because sadly, not everyone is born with common sense. It has to be learned. But you really must not mislead the consumer. And of course, Sephora came under some very hard criticism because Sephora USA certainly wanted to push this non-toxic story. And so if I go back to the second slide that I showed, it is this social media boom is creating this architecture of misinformation. And if we don't challenge it, the beauty industry really is going to be damaged further than it already is. And then recently, back in March, the inventor of the web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, said, we really do need a web that spreads truth rather than rubbish. And so when you are looking at claims and, shall we say, trying to take out, shall we say, the fantasy, is you have to look at it from expectation and viewpoint and the fact that the facts matter. But these facts not only have to be truthful, but of course they have to be honest. And so that's all about the imaging, the words, the expectation that the consumer has from the whole claim in relation to the expectation that they have from the product. And so you need to understand the claims that you are developing and writing and looking at what is actually factual and what is it actually implying or suggesting. And so you really do need to look at it from the point of the consumer. And that is why it's very important that your body of evidence supports the whole claim, meaning the whole product. And then of course the other thing then is how do you understand the claim anatomy? As for those of you who've actually read my book, is that I've broken this down, like in an idiot's guide, basically, is looking at it from the point of view of a tree. Here in Hamburg, the blossoms are out now and it's absolutely wonderful. And this is what the consumer is seeing when they are looking at a cosmetic product. They are looking at basically the pretty bits. It's the blossoms, the leaves, the fruits, the flowers. So, if it's a claim such as it moisturizes the skin, but everybody knows that those fruits and flowers and leaves mean nothing if there isn't a good solid trunk that is not sustained by solid, healthy root system. So in this context, the trunk would talk about repairing the skin's barrier, which is basically what the product actually does. But why it does what it does, of course, is all about the scientific research and the information that is continually generated. And so even though the trunk and the fruits and flowers are exposed, they are not going to remain solid and strong if you don't have that underground root system that supports this. And if that underground root system is, shall we say, inferior, damaged in any way, when the tree gets struck by lightning or stormy winds, it's going to fall down. And the stormy winds, in this case, of course, would be the advertising standards authorities, customer complaints, competitor complaints, etc. And so, therefore, when it comes to communication, the biggest problem that we have in our, shall we say, technological age is that we do not listen or even read to understand. We listen or read to reply. And I think many of you listening today really do have an affinity to the image on the left. Now, the image on the right was something, and I have to thank Heidi Bannister for posting that up on Twitter, because the information that she's put in this slide, I've actually seen that same information from when I joined the cosmetic industry back in the late 1980s, so that's 30-something years ago, and it's not changed. So what is it that we are doing wrong, that one, we are not addressing the issues that women and men want today? So what is it that we're not listening to, what we are not reading into, and therefore what we are not understanding? We still haven't done that, but we are making a lot of noise about replying to all of this. We need to still do something. And so how do we bring this all into context? Well, I thought I would use an example that's very hot today, and I'm sorry about that red line. That should be struck through patience, but never mind, is the AstraZeneca vaccine. Yes, I'm a Brit based here in Hamburg, and I am totally frustrated about the European Union's way of trying to vaccinate its residents. And I was listening to a late night programme here on BBC World, because it's the only BBC programme I can get. And some of you may be aware of Ross Atkins. And he summarised the situation with the AstraZeneca virus. And when I first heard it, I thought that is exactly the problem that we have in the cosmetic industry. So I will go through this now with you now. Of course, the first thing is all about the clarity of data and the amount of data. And this, he is talking obviously about the AstraZeneca vaccine, but we could use, shall we say, a cosmetic product in this context. And then there is the perception growth. And because of the lack of clarity in the data and the amount of data that is being shared, that there were discrepancies in this, perception was growing, and what he described as social media madness that almost turned this poor vaccine into what he described as an Aldi vaccine, though admittedly there's nothing wrong with Aldi. But the consequence was that, of course, there was erosion of confidence. And this is exactly what is happening with cosmetic products. And so what we are seeing then is that decisions are then being made based on both disinformation and misinformation, exacerbated by the press, because that's the job of the press in this context, and of course social media. And so you know, we have the press behaving as the central wooden spoon, just stirring it up. And so then if we then swing this back then to cosmetics, once an ingredient or a brand starts something, everyone else follows, because they don't want to be seen as foolish when the something that is being put out there is foolish. And a classic example of this in the cosmetic industry is the paraben debacle. And so then we are then left with what Ross Atkins described as the three Ps, which we can take on board here too. And that is PR, the process, which is basically our regulation and legislation, because bureaucracy can make it extremely rigid, corporate politics, brand politics, the politics of the industry as a whole, and patience, though obviously the cosmetic consumer is not a patient. So here I'm talking about the non-average consumer as well as the average consumer. And then at the end of it all, of course, is hazard versus risk. And as everybody knows, social media, the press, always focus on the hazard first because it makes big headlines, and big headlines sell, and it's all about clickbaiting too. And so more often than not, they fail to take into account the risk, and certainly the risk as regards to the AstraZeneca vaccine, or even in our case, a pink lipstick may actually be very small. So what is the solution? Well, obviously, I think nobody would disagree that education should certainly be first and foremost up there, because whilst ignorance isn't a crime, waste is, or it should be. And we have certainly two very good platforms. For those of you who follow the EcoWell in Canada, though they do operate very widely here, in the European Union, and of course the international group Sense About Science, because these two groups are not attached to any particular company, and so they are very independent. I think we should put aside our commercial competitiveness and work as a global industry to address product messaging. And we need to ensure that the messages of that messaging are giving the factual message. This is especially true of influencers, marketing, advertisers, and copywriters. And I think they should be obliged to read and understand the cosmetic regulations, irrespective of where you are in the world. And I would also like to see the EU common criteria applied to ingredients as well as actual products, or at least the ingredient suppliers should use that legislation as guidelines. And with all the ingredient suppliers that I work with, they do. So it needs to extend. And certainly these criteria should be extended to influence and other similar people on social medias. But it also should apply to the stores and the press. And we need to be more aggressive in calling out mistakes where people are focusing on fantasy, twisting facts, because at the end of the day, it is dangerous. Nobody would disagree that we need more expert policemen, and here I'm talking about trading standards. And although, for example, in the UK, the CTPA really have started to develop training programs for trading standards, there just aren't enough of them. And this question has been asked on and off for many years, is should there be a peer review process before a product goes out? But I think that should probably be a last resort if we can't come up with some better resolutions. And of course, everybody would have seen that a small amount of information can be very dangerous. We've seen that recently in American politics, and of course, this whole issue over the COVID vaccine. And we've also seen in anyone who is on social media that anyone can be a cosmetic expert these days. And so somehow we need to try to find the right balance so that everybody can have a place in the industry. We've also seen a rise of celebrity doctors where dermatologists are becoming beauticians, and what they are doing is they are blurring the lines between what cosmetics are and basically, should we say, invasive treatments or semi-invasive treatments for treating certain skin disorders, if you like, wrinkles and what have you. And what's happening is we are seeing that consumers are getting confused, and we need to find a better separation there. We also need a wider platform for our industry toxicologists. And I think we need some champions here in the same way that we have Greta and Sir David for the environment. The industry needs its own versions. The inky debate needs to be solved once and for all if it's going to help with reducing the fire around toxicity. And whilst I do not advocate removing inky listings, I think we really should keep it. Maybe there needs to be something else for consumers as well as for doctors. And we really do have to push and increase consumer education platforms. And we have to put aside this, should we say, political correctness and glossing. I think the Society of Cosmetic Scientists in the UK did a good job when they presented the cosmetic industry on ITN, what was it, last year or the year before? I think it was the year before. But although it was very nice and it was very, shall we say, well presented, it was so image conscious that I thought it was a bit too PC, and they should have been a little bit more direct at times. And the other thing that we need to take into account is what are our values versus the interests and the cancel culture. Another thing that needs to be considered, I don't think any would disagree, that we have too many products on the market and more are arriving. And in this day and age, we should be consuming less. And I think we should look at reducing product ranges to the bare minimum in terms of the product numbers and ingredients used. Look at redefining and restructuring some of these categories and only producing products that basically deliver. There's a lot of consumer demand for instant gratification, and we've seen those who do follow social media, the downsides of pumping up lips and making people look like dolls. That's the only way to describe them. And for example, you know, everybody says, oh no, I hate looking old. I don't want to look old. You know, I have to put my lips up this and put slugs on my eyebrows and what have you. But you can't de-age the skin properly without de-aging the other organs of the body, because they're all linked. And at the end of the day, cosmetics are only cosmetics. And so we really need to push the healthy lifestyle, and also the fact that people need to understand that their genetics plays a big role here. And cosmetics are not fashion items, and neither is the skin. And this message has to sink in, because if it doesn't, we are going to see this perpetuation on social media, and it's particularly damaging to young girls, as we have seen with this rise of female harassment, though it equally applies to men and young boys being harassed. You know, the cosmetic industry has to take a role in that. And so we should love the skin that we are in. It's uniquely ours. My skin is different to yours, and yours is different to the one sitting next to you. And then, sorry to pontificate here, many of us, certainly those listening in, we are privileged in that we live in a democratic free society. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think everyone can understand that. And sadly, what we are seeing is the lack of responsibility and accountability, and the impact of that on the wider society, because nobody wants, or at least few are prepared to pay the price that's being asked, and that's responsibility. And you can say that I am making this up, but you only have to look at COVID to see that what I'm saying, it's right. And so what we need to be doing is that when we are developing a product and creating the messages that go with that product, that what is the implication of those messages and the impact of them on the wider society. And however, there is a fight back, which is great. At the time of this recording, there were 2 posted on LinkedIn, and one was the fight back against the claims that using a sunbed would either prevent or cure Alzheimer's. And then, of course, the other one, of course, was relating to Gwyneth Paltrow, who, while she might be a very admirable actress, she's not doing very well as regards to her goop claims. And there was another one that she was being challenged on. I think it was as regards to clean beauty. And of course, now we are also seeing the influence, and finally, the Advertising Standards Authorities are really pushing against influencers. So to summarize, I'm not going to give you a whole load of points. I'm just leaving you with a picture. So Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, and he's going to stay on that wall if you do get everything right as regards to your messaging when it comes to cosmetic claims and how you build your body of evidence. Because even though, if you don't and the wall falls down, you may well be able to rebuild that wall, but, you're going to have to lay another egg. And whilst I am this image, because I took it from my book, was relating to a product, it's equally valid for business and industry credibility. So with that, I would like to thank you. By all means, do follow me on social media and my own website. And of course, my book, Help I'm Covered in Adjectives. And that is a fairly, shall we say, dummy's guide to developing cosmetic claims in the context of the European legislation. So with that, if you have any questions, I think we will now go live. Thank you.